good afternoon. These are some of the top business news around the world at this time. Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, and Ghana have been listed as the key growth drivers for African economies. Meanwhile, South Africa's rand firms up today after the U.S. Federal Reserve kept its fundraise on hold and the SARB expected to announce its own rate decisions in a few hours' time. Plus, Standard Chartered Bank expects oil prices to rebound sharply in the second half of 2016, with Brent crude touching a possible $75 a barrel. It's Thursday, January the 28th. Welcome to Business Incorporated. I am Boston Amafaye here at Channels Television Global Headquarters. We welcome our viewers here and around the world. Stick around for the next 30 minutes. Let's get the show started. Now, this is the first story. Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, and Ghana have been rated as the key growth drivers for African economies as mineral and resource demands. And that's according to a new survey of global logistics executives. In the survey, which is part of the 2016 Agility Emerging Markets Logistics Index, industry executives said the countries were the most promising markets in sub-Saharan Africa. According to the report, poor infrastructure, lack of power generation, and corruption continue to pose the most risks to African economies. And South Africa's rand firmed up today after the U.S. Federal Reserve kept interest rates on hold and sounded cautious on the outlook, giving investors a leeway to put money back into emerging markets. The rand was changing hands at 16.37 to the dollar, 0.46% firmer than its 16.445 Wednesday close in New York trade. As central banks in some advanced economies move away from the era of historically low interest rates, emerging markets that have wide current account deficits to fund are expected to be hit the hardest as the supply of liquidity tightens globally. Meanwhile, the South African Reserve Bank is expected to raise interest rates later today as it looks to curb climbing inflation in Africa's most advanced economy. And the Federal Reserve said it was closely monitoring global economic conditions, but will not raise interest rates in a decision widely expected by most analysts. The central bank said U.S. economic growth had slowed as exports fell because of the strengthening dollar. Interest rates remain between 0.25 and 0.5% after being raised for the first time in nearly a decade in December of 2015. The U.S. Fed issued a statement on Wednesday after a two-day meeting headed by Janet Yellen, the chairman. The bank did not signal when it would next raise rates, but did say it expects the U.S. labor market to remain strong and inflation to rise. Let's talk about today's markets, starting from Asia, where the markets are closed. Mixed session today, despite a poor lead from Wall Street on Wednesday after the Federal Reserve warned of slowing growth. The region's biggest index, that's the Japanese Nikkei 225, fell 0.75% to close at 17,000 points. In China, the Shanghai Composite followed the regional trend and fell 0.8% to 2,713 in early trade, while the Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index was flat at 19,071. In South Korea, the Kospi Index managed to reverse earlier losses and close slightly higher by 0.5% at 1,906. Okay, today's been a very topsy-turvy day for the German's largest bank, Deutsche Bank, reporting earnings that disappoint, and that's affecting a number of other banks, big banks in Europe and the U.S. The earnings season is now in full swing. Let's get across to DWTV financial correspondent Javier Aguedes at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. Good afternoon, Javier. Let's get this conversation started. Let's start with the big elephant in the room. Deutsche Bank's earnings disappoint. The shares down more than 3% as we speak. The poor results is likely to be seen beyond Deutsche Bank. Give us an overview of what to expect from other big European banks' earnings.
Hi, Bosun. Good to see you. Well, you know, the problems that we are talking about here at Deutsche Bank are very specific to Deutsche Bank, actually, because it's not only something that has been driven by the current conditions of the markets or the economy in general, but something that was a result of bad decisions that the bank made in the past. And I'm not talking about the scandals only. I'm already also talking about the structure of the institution, which, as we know, is not necessarily efficient. So all in all, what we can expect from other banks are actually way better better results, because as the economy is recovering here in Europe, as the United States is growing stronger, of course that means a lot of opportunities for different segments of the banks. Particularly considering that the conditions for them to lend at this moment are also very good. So we shouldn't expect problems like these for other European banks, but it is something that we can only or possibly only observe in this scale at Deutsche Bank, which is of course good news for the competitors, like the second largest bank in Germany, Commerzbank, which has definitely not had that bad results so far.
Okay, so let's stick with the earnings, Javier. Aside the banks, other firms are turning in the last quarter 2015. Roche, the Swiss company, pharmaceutical, also in the news. How much of the weakness in these earnings numbers are due to the crunching global oil market in 2015?
Well, you know, that is one big question and one big concern that investors had and are still having, because nobody really knows what the effect of these low oil prices are ultimately going to be, because we know that it has advantages and disadvantages. So it largely depends on which branch you're looking at. Of course, any company that is directly related to oil, like the oil companies, of course, or the energy companies in general, are performing very badly right now and are being hit by these low oil prices. But we also know that some of the companies are being highly benefited by them. So if we take a look at some of the earnings that we've seen so far, we saw, for example, Siemens and Philips, both industrial companies that are reliant on exports and that are benefiting from those lower oil prices. So we know that there are some good news on the way. All in all, the earnings season has definitely not been as bad as many had expected, especially considering the economic slowdown in China and those lower oil prices, since almost all the reports have been either in line with expectations or slightly above, with a few exceptions. We saw yesterday, for example, one of the biggest chemical companies here in Germany that was shocking investors. But all in all, I would say things are not as bad as many thought.
Earnings on the street. We also have interest rate decisions. A raft of that in the current week is the first month of the new year, so we expect all the central banks to come out with some kind of rate decisions. South Africa's Reserve Bank is expected to announce its first 2016 rates in a few hours from now. Any interest, particularly from your traders in Frankfurt and across Europe, about South Africa, Africa's most advanced economy?
Well, of course, there is interest, as South Africa is a regional heavyweight. And if we take a look, one step back and take a look at the more broader scenario, we know that all the emerging economies, and especially those that were grouped under that BRICS acronym that you know, which includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, you know, all these countries where the hopes of investors were until very recently. So there is a big interest in not seeing those economies collapse. That's why there's so much concern about China. That's why there's so much concern about Brazil. And South Africa is in a moment where that interest rate decision is going to be very important, because we know that the country is struggling in a very delicate situation between a rising inflation rate and also an economy that is not growing at the pace that many wanted. So it is going to be crucial. Remember that the expectations are for them to increase the interest rates in 50 basis points. The last interest rate hike, if I'm not mistaken, was of 25 basis points. So we'll see how that goes and how that plays, but of course expectations are for South Africa's economy to keep growing and to keep you know, not disappointing as many other of the BRICS states unfortunately have done.
Okay, let's see how the BRICS hold together. Thank you very much. Javier Arguedas, DWTV financial correspondent for Channels TV at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. When we come back, a surprising oil forecast from Standard Chartered Bank. What's the price level been in the outlook reports? We'll come back after the break.